ce que nous pouvons donc apprendre. La pandémie que nous avons traversée nous rappelle à bien des égards cet état de paralysie qui a animé les premiers disciples entre peur du jugement et crainte du monde extérieur. Si, je tiens à remercier les organisateurs de cette conférence pour l'invitation.
Conference, and I would like to share some reflections and I thank the speakers for the contributions they're going to give today. In the spirit of crisis, our responsibility was a collective responsibility, and we had to endure social distancing and other measures. But we were all called to be together to promote solidarity. And solidarity was very important. We had to give up our personal and individual liberty for social well-being. We have, of course, to unite, and united, we have been living with symbols that are enshrined in the presence of in our world. So what is visible and invisible? The masks, for instance, have become the visible sign of a fight against an invisible virus. And covering our face has become a ritual. And also in the churches and in all the places of worship, these measures have been adopted to protect people. Christianity in general and Orthodoxy in particular are based in the incarnation of Christ. Christ becoming man. And this is something we perceive through our senses. The period has been very difficult for everyone. We were not able to participate in 2021 in the different festivities. We couldn't participate at Easter and Christmas altogether. The responsible for the various religions and all faithful have, of course, taken some precautionary measures. Someone considered that we betrayed our faith in taking these decisions, but faith is not a miracle maker. Science and faith together are working together. They're not incompatible. I think that this is an important issue, and we have to consider this furthermore, also in the future. As believers, we had to take the responsibility of taking care of the well-being of others. We can be united in the spirit, even if we are separated in the flesh. Protecting health of all those around us is a testimony of our faith, taking care of the others because the others come before us. With our faith in God, we can overcome the current difficulties and reconcile scientific reason and faith. and we can transfigure the world. We have the great pleasure to have the contribution from different panelists. We have different backgrounds, different tradition, different religions, and also a different experience. I would like to thank all the panelists for their presence, and I would like to thank also the audience, and I would like to start by giving the floor to our dear friend, Oded Wiener, who is the great rabbi of Israel. And we will have 2 minutes. And please stay within the time allotted to you. And
thank you very much, our chairman, Metropolitan Emmanuel, our colleague, honorable colleague at the panelists. I'm very happy to be with you on this panel. I must admit that when the organizers from Sant'Egidio community asked me to participate in this panel, Living Together, Lessons from the Pandemic, I hesitated. After all, in the last 2 years, each of us has heard so much about the COVID-19 virus. From every aspect, from doctors, experts, scientists, celebrities, and TV stars. I thought to myself, what else is there to say that has not been already said? Yet, on second thought, I decided that maybe we really should clarify some basic and important points for ourselves and lessons that we learned during the corona pandemic, which could affect future crises that could harm the health and the well-being of the world. So I could not refuse the request of the good and important friend from the community of Sant'Egidio, since this conference, by its very existence, expresses our common desire to bring about, through dialogue and learning, a better world without epidemic, crisis, violence, and war. I do not intend to refer to any specific professional, medical, or scientific field, but we look back at the history of past epidemics throughout the world, we understand how correct and important the global treatment of the COVID-19 pandemic was. And it undoubtedly saved many millions from death. Let's take just 2 examples. During the Black Death epidemic, which struck North Africa, Asia, and Europe in the years 1347 to 1351, it is estimated that at least 75 million people died, and the number were probably much higher. In China alone, there were about 35 million deaths. And more recently, from 1918 to 1920, between 25 to 50 million people died from the Spanish flu, with about 500 million were infected. What was the difference about this current pandemic? Although estimates speak of more than 660 million people who were infected, only, in big quotation mark, about 6.5 million people died of COVID-19. Of course, there is no doubt that we are deeply saddened by the loss of any life. As our Talmudic sources said, the whole world and all its inhabitants were created from a single person, Adam, to teach us that if anyone who kills another person, it is if he killed an entire world. And if anyone saves one soul, it is as he saved the whole world. There is no doubt that modern medicine has made amazing progress and offers medical solutions that in the past could not even be imagined. But how did modern medicine manage to find cures for the COVID-19 virus so relatively quickly? And how did the medical establishment develop the effective treatments that saved the life of so many people? If we analyze the action taken, they can be divided into 4 circles. The first circle, the global and the international circle. The second circle, the world scientists and the pharmaceutical companies. The third circle, national circle in the various countries. And the fourth circle, the community and social circle. Let me elaborate. In the first circle, there is no doubt that we have not witnessed for many years such impressive collaboration among global bodies. Over a very short period of time, many of the world's leaders realized that if they did not deal with the pandemic with determination and with all means at their disposal, the results would be extremely serious and would harm all people, regardless of origin, religion, gender, or age. Indeed, the cooperation between world leaders, their ministers of health, national institutions, and the UN was unprecedented. The willingness to allocate huge sources to scientists from various disciplines without the usual bureaucracy was revolutionary. Countries were willing to help and transfer life-saving devices such as the ECMO machines to countries where the epidemic was spreading rapidly. It should be noted, unfortunately, that despite the tremendous global effort, poor countries that could not purchase the essential devices or vaccines were still severely affected. We must find ways to correct this situation in the future. The second circle, the world scientists and the pharmaceutical companies made a supreme effort, working around the clock, to find a cure and produce a vaccine for the COVID-19. In every country where there were medical, technological capability, every possible experiment was conducted, and the resulting information was shared. Budget allocated to the scientists, almost without limit, helped to speed up the work to finding a solution. Western and Russian pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer, Moderna, Merck, Hemrem, and the Israeli Weizmann Institute joined the common effort, while the American Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which approved new drugs for use, greatly accelerated the mandatory test to issue early approval for the new drugs. Similarly, recommended procedures such as wearing masks, preventing public gatherings, making reliable tests for detecting the virus, and making vaccination available were issued by countries all over the world, which greatly helped reduce morbidity. The willingness of electronics and printed media to spread the directives and various ministers of health also greatly helped in eradicating the coronavirus. The third circle, the national circle in the various countries. There were definitely differences among countries in their ability to respond to the crisis, investing funds to find COVID-19 and purchasing vaccines. Moreover, there were many differences between countries in their willingness to enforce restrictions such as wearing masks, banning public gatherings, and controlling international air and sea travelers. I should mention here the great damage caused by extremists, experts in their own eyes, who, contrary to all the evidence, complied claimed that COVID-19 was nothing more serious than a normal flu, ignoring the mass of data and statistics. They spread fake news and claim that the vaccines were conspiracy that caused only harm and call on people not to be vaccinated. Unfortunately, many of those who listened to them and to their advice died. The fourth circle, the smallest yet perhaps the most important one, is the community and the social circle. It is clear, proven that communities and socialists that practice mutual responsibility, love, and concern for others, charity and kindness developed, and the lives of many of elderly, the lonely, and people in need of help were saved. People who checked on their neighbors daily, social activists who made sure to bring food, medicine, and medical assistance to the needy were directly responsible for saving lives. In Judaism, mutual responsibility and concern for the various circles is a central and main motive. Just a week ago, we celebrated Sukkot, the Festival of Tabernacles, one of the most important religious festivals in the Jewish calendar. When the temple existed, special ceremonies were offering and brought to Jerusalem, and the people prayed and asked for peace and the well-being for the entire world. The festival marks also the beginning of the rainy season, so prayers are offered that rain will fall in every country and provide food and livelihood for all the inhabitants. On an individual level, the teaching of love your neighbors as yourself is an important tenet in the Torah, teaching us that every person is created in God's image. Because of this basic Jewish principle, during the Corona period, in Israel and around the Jewish world, there were wonderful manifestations of helping the needy, the lonely, and the sick, sometimes even at significant self-risk to the many activists who offered help. It should be noted, by the way, that the epidemic is still not completely over, and it is important to continue to be careful. If I go back to the beginning of my remarks, it is now completely clear why the community of Sant'Egidio chose this topic for discussion. I am not sure that everyone sitting here is aware of all the activities of helping and caring for others which the community, out of great love and responsibility, does throughout the year. All members of the Sant'Egidio community work entirely voluntarily. The community does not hesitate to send volunteers to help with epidemics such as HIV in Africa or war zone to bring peace between warring parties despite the risk posed to the volunteers. In conclusion, only with modesty and humility can the world begin to understand the nothingness of man compared to the greatness of God and his creation. A caring and joint effort within the various circles regarding radiating from universal level to the individual level is required. At the same time, the personal example of volunteers and social activities in the field and activists will influence each of the circle and result in cooperation that will save millions of lives and keep evil and the fear of epidemics and war far away. When the desire for reconciliation, understanding, and peace are at the forefront, we all benefit from a better world in which every man helps his neighbor. In the word of prophet Isaiah, they helped everyone his neighbor, and everyone said to his brother, "Be of a good courage. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Odette, for these words which brought us the need for dialogue and learning after the pandemic, and also your reference to the four circles, the global one, the world pharmaceutical companies that produce the necessary vaccines, also the national circle, but most important, the community and social circles that was needed, and is still needed in order to have a joint effort, as you mentioned, to combat the pandemic around the world. Thank you for these words. And I am glad to invite now His Beatitude Patriarch Sacco to take the floor. You are most important, I guess.
Your Eminence, the President, thank you so much. Vorrei ringraziare Sant'Egidio per questa iniziativa
I'd like to thank the community of Sant'Egidio for this initiative, for launching this cry for peace, that I believe is a cry for hope of the whole of humankind. What is it that we take away as a lesson from the pandemic? The fact that we stay close to one another, solidarity, and also the unity of all politicians and people, so to overcome this very major danger. We have succeeded, maybe not completely, but in a large proportion. And this is what we should do to put an end to these absurd wars that have no sense whatsoever, especially this war between Russia and Ukraine, and the danger of getting to the point of using nuclear weapons. We cannot but do anything else to solve these problems if not going through the promotion of a courageous dialogue. These problems can be solved only through diplomacy, certainly not by using weapons, because in this case, the very high price will be paid by innocents, by poor people, and the devastation will be global. And for what? I have a suggestion to submit. It may certainly sound strange, but I believe that politicians will not be able to finally achieve peace, but all the religious people and volunteers and the believers should join and get to the streets to say enough with wars. We know that to build peace, we must promote cultural diversity and religious diversity along with solidarity. Peace cannot be achieved if not on the basis of fraternity, solidarity, love, and solidarity between people to work together for the common good. Peace is a process that needs to educate people. And to do that, we need to work on ourselves and on everyone.
peace is certainly a challenge, but our differences that seem to keep us apart, in reality, they make us complementary. Every one of us and every one of our countries has a special talent that can be given to society as a whole. We are living in a new world that demands us to underline and enhance the relevance of diversity. And this is in line with the overall global approach that aspires to affirm human rights for everyone and the full respect of freedom and dignity of all people. It is from these differences, from this complementarity, that we may say we depend on. We depend on each other. Nowadays, we have to go beyond ourselves, our own interests, so to work together with friendship and will to build peace. Also, the Gospels say, blessed are the peacemakers. And to build peace in our societies, we need to develop a true citizenship that is at the basis of a harmonious coexistence. Those that flee their home countries and come to the West, they do so because they look for rights and dignity. Coexistence is based on different levels. We all believe in one single God, although we may have different religions. Socially, we're all brothers under the umbrella of humankind. From a political point of view, we are all citizens of the same planet. Nevertheless, religious extremism has distorted coexistence, and politicized sectarianism has demolished the human mosaic, and corruption now has spread out all across our society. So we need to educate everyone in the wealth of diversity. It's what really matters is to live in peace and cooperate with one another, to respect and work for the common good, and above all, the role of institutions in the field of education is not that of simply providing teachings, but it's also meant to promote the training of new generations, strengthening their respect for diversity, pluralism, and also the strengthening of solidarity and coexistence. This has to go through the promotion of an honest, frank dialogue and friendship, and the strengthening of reconciliation and solidarity among people, religions, and different cultures in order to achieve peace and prosperity for all citizens, as Pope Francis said when visiting Iraq in March 2021. This education is the building block of coexistence because conflicts, divisions, and present-day blocs are the outcome of ignorance, of a flat culture of selfishness and personal vested interests. From this point of view, I invite you all from the West and the East to review our own legacy, our own traditions, in order to change them and make them free of all expressions of fundamentalism, hatred, lack of respect, and adjust them to today's reality and social diversity. We need to work hard to build a civil, democratic world resting on citizenship and not on a system that keeps us apart. This will allow us to build peace in our society, and the development of a true citizenship is the necessary condition for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Beatitude, for these words that bring us down to earth again, and stressed the importance of how the new world would really respect, love, and have more fraternity. And that in order to change the world, we need to have this in mind. And that's the way that we can proceed to peace that is necessary around the globe, having all these difficulties with the wars around the war in Ukraine, but also in other places around the globe. Thank you very much for encouraging us to go to this way of living. And now I would like to hear also from another tradition, and I would like to ask my good colleague, Metropolitan Seraphim from the Orthodox Church of Romania, to take the floor.
I would like to thank the community of Sant'Egidio for inviting me at this round table and to give my contribution about the title of the meeting, Living Together, Lessons from the Pandemic. In the 2 previous years that were signed by the pandemic of COVID-19 were a great test for humanity as a whole, because of what we call the vengeance of God. I would like to speak about the punishment of God for the sins committed. But this is in contradiction with the tenet of Christianity. God is love. Even if the Old Testament often speaks about the wrath of God against the sinner, his vengeance and punishment, we have to understand this expression considering the spiritual level of mankind at the time. Today, we can no longer use those terms because people often are fragile, with little faith or no faith at all, and they can be scandalized by this. If God is love, we cannot speak of the vengeance of God or punishment of God, because love doesn't punish, has no vengeance. Just the opposite. Love always protects, always hopes, always perseveres. 1 Corinthians. Our sins are punishing us, make us suffer, and make us unhappy. How come? The Holy Scriptures say that sin is a transgression of the law. John 3:4, Romans 4:15. From the very beginning of the world, God established laws governing the universe, including mankind, that is a microcosmos, as the father of the church say. In the heart of each of us, there is the whole humanity and the whole cosmos, a deep reality that only faith can make clear to us. We know that all what exists in the universe, the stars, the astro, the planets, the galaxies, metagalaxies, everything obeys the law that God impressed in their very nature. And I quote, he established laws that are not going to transgress, said King David, and all existence follow the laws of God. And therefore we have harmony in the universe. Otherwise we would have chaos. Cosmos in Greek means also harmony. But only the man who has a personal liberty can transgress the law of God. And therefore, there is no harmony, but there is chaos. And the loss of harmony makes us suffer enormously. We transgress the physical and moral laws, the moral laws enshrined in the Ten Commandments every day, just by ignorance or because we want to do so. But nature never forgives us. Nature never forgives. Nature punishes us with all the tests and difficulties of stress, physical and psychological sickness and disorder, troubles, loss of internal peace. And when we transgress the law of procreation, we cause damage to others. We are not forgiven, and the sin is in us. All these sins that come from bad passions subdue us, make us sick and unhappy. We cannot forget our sins and our greed that destroys the environment around us and the very existence of mankind. And therefore, we can understand that the pandemic, as every other disease and distress and trouble, is affecting our life and is the effect of our sins and not the punishment of God. But all what I said makes us understand that God is not present in the life of mankind and university, if not through its law, but just the opposite. This is not true because God is present in the universe, in the life of mankind. God is there supporting its creation and has a very clear end. God is love and is therefore pays respect to human liberty and not imposing. He withdraws mysteriously when mankind is sinning because God respects human liberty. But God comes back when we human repent our sins. Now we wonder, how is God present when we are distressed, when we suffer, like we were during the pandemic with COVID-19? God withdraws because he pays respect to our liberty, our freedom. And St. Paul says, and I quote, where sins are proliferating, grace is superabundant. Romans 5:20. What does it mean? That God never abandons us. Respecting our freedom, when we go against him and we commit our sins, we suffer, but we suffer because of our sins. A loving father never leaves his children alone, even if they go against him. The father suffers with his children, supports them during their distress, and let them come back home. And
pécheur,
the love of God for the sinners is really a big love, great love. Therefore, we have to understand that we should never, never forget that God is merciful. Is merciful even if we sin. But this doesn't mean that we have to continue to commit sins, because God is merciful. God forgives, but is not. But we continue to suffer when we commit sins, and we suffer every day. What can we learn from the pandemic? First of all, we learn that our life is very fragile and depends on the respect of the law of God that is enshrined in the nature of mankind. In order to live harmoniously and peacefully in our heart, in our society, in the environment all around us, we have to comply with the law of nature, the moral law that are there to protect us from degradation and to make us live happily and peacefully in this Mother Earth. We are made in His image and likeness. This is something we have in our heart. We are love. We want to become love. Only love for God, love for mankind, love for all creation makes us happy. And all our life is this journey towards love, is an effort to have love in our heart. And as Sant'Egidio, the Syrian, said, and I quote, "It's a heart that is burning for the whole creation, for mankind, for birds, for the beast, for the demon, for all creations. It's so strong, so violent. It's a compassion that heart breaks when he sees suffering, the suffering of the humblest nature. That is why he prays with tears for the enemies of truth, for those who cause harm, so that they are pardoned and protected. God, help us to have such a merciful heart, compassion for mankind and for creation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci, Éminence, pour ces paroles qui nous rappellent que certainement.
And thank you so much. You have reminded us that in the world there is not a vengeful God, a Lord that punishes, but on the contrary, our Lord has given us the example. He has created the universe, has given us the laws, and you've reminded us of all of this. But above all, as you said, Lord is love. And the only thing that He's asking us for is to shed our status of sinners, because we must become love as well. We must prove our love for our Lord and for our fellow man. This is the only way towards a better world. The lessons that we have taken, that we have learned from the pandemic, will certainly be of use in the future.
Our friend from Indonesia to bring these ideas from another tradition, from the Islamic tradition, from Indonesia, where he comes, a country with so many millions of Muslim believers. Thank you.
I would like to begin with an Islamic greeting and the way we in Indonesia greet the audience. Both mean peace be upon all of you. Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the community of Sant'Egidio, who is inviting me to this very prestigious conference. The theme of the conference is quite relevant to our situations, since we are free from the pandemic and we are facing the so-called new normal life. I a little bit modified the themes into multi-faith collaboration in the post-pandemic time. As much have been said, COVID-19 pandemic that hit the world since the end of the year 2019 has brought miseries to human life. Many people, including in my country, Indonesia, and including religious leaders, maybe dozen hundred passed their way because of the COVID-19. No single country was exempt from the pandemic, and almost all countries suffered. World economy has been stagnated, and political hegemony stopped. Since the last 2 years, the world has shown rapid change economically. Economic recession affected the entire world economy with greater detriment to some countries than others. The crisis endangers many countries around the globe, and certain countries, including my country, Indonesia, are painstakingly trying to overcome this crisis. COVID-19 pandemic has brought fundamental change in human life, as they have been imposed to practicing the health protocol, especially wearing masks, always washing hands, and taking physical distance when interact with others. Implementing this health protocol has also affected regulation in worship, such as in Islam, in mosques, Muslims should take physical distance, while they were taught to take closest distance with fellow worshippers. In the field of education, since learning activities take the form of online, many impacts have occurred mentally and psychologically. In countries without adequate information technology infrastructures, some negative cases have occurred, such as students could not follow learning well, which in turn, according to many experts on education, has led to learning loss and even generation loss. Yet COVID-19 pandemic has also paved the way for creativity and innovation. Many examples of online business in culinary and other consuming goods, especially health items, have taken place and been developed. Due to any restriction in communication, virtual conversation have spread out globally and connected many people to engage in finding a solution for the post-pandemic era. Religions and religionists must come out as the solution and the problem solver. Allow me to share a little bit the Islamic perspective. Pandemic and other miseries in human life in the Islamic perspective are considered as musibah, misfortune, or bad things afflicted human being. It is God's decision, but in the same time a consequence of human's deed. Pandemic is a form of mischief done by men, whether derived from what they ate or behead, or mischief they have done. In the Holy Quran, it is stipulated in chapter called Rum, Surah Rum, verses 41, mischief has appeared on land and sea because of the deed that the hands of men have earned, that Allah may give them a taste of some of their deeds in order to turn back from evil. Ladies and gentlemen, human civilization has faced degradation by the emergence of multi-crises in the world in the last few decades. The modern civilization has demonstrated global disorder, uncertainty, and accumulative global damages, compounded by poverty, illiteracy, injustice, discrimination, and many forms of violence, both at national and global level, and of course, climate change and global warming. So this is the reasons that we need to extend what I call it interfaith collaboration. But this collaboration should have an ethical basis, and I put it in the human fraternity. The signing of Declaration of Human Fraternity for Peace and Coexistence by Pope Francis and Sheikh Al-Azhar, Dr. Ahmad At-Tayyib in Abu Dhabi, 5 of February 2019, signifies an historic milestone of the history of humanity and human civilization. It has not only symbolized a friendly relation between two supreme religious institutions, namely the Vatican and Al-Azhar al-Sharif, and then two great religious communities, the Muslim world and the Catholic churches, but also a strong commitment to the preservation of humanity and human fraternity. Religion are indeed for human being and humanity. They derive from the ultimate being, the Creator, conceived and called by different names, yet they are not for Him alone. Rather, religions were sent to human beings for the well-being of mankind. In the Holy Quran, it is stipulated that Prophet Muhammad's mission is to spread peace and mercy to the mankind. Therefore, enhancement of humanity and human fraternity is a must. It is a collective responsibility of human beings, regardless of their race, ethnicity, culture, and religion, to advance the degree of their humanity, as humanity may fall down to the lowest level. So, what needs to be done in a viable collaboration? Sharing responsibility becomes a compelling duty, as no one individual, organization, including faith-based organization, can walk alone. Partnership with other faiths and sectors becomes crucial for addressing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the context of interfaith collaboration, we need to explore ways to move beyond political and theological dialogues. We need to develop cooperation as part of well-grounded dialogue. It is cooperation that reflects and represents our common concern to heal the world. Together now, we face serious accumulative global damages. We witness people who suffer of poverty, energy crisis, water crisis, hunger, and other human calamities. It is our humanity duty to find ways for more positive and constructive cooperation on the ground. As a matter of fact, there have been many dialogue and also collaboration between the people of different faiths. including initiated by the Community of Sant'Egidio, who has success stories and conflict resolutions. And we together, the Community of Sant'Egidio and my organization in Indonesia, Muhammadiyah, were members of the International Contact Group for Peace Process between the government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. And we are also, my organization Muhammadiyah, has been invited by the Community of Sant'Egidio to work together for the conflict resolution in the Central African Republic. And for the future, in the post-pandemic time, I believe that Community of Sant'Egidio must take initiative to initiate multi-faith collaboration, not only for disaster management, as there have been good examples of multi-faith collaborations between various organizations from the Catholic, Protestant, Muslims, Jewish, as well as Buddhists, especially to take the part in the problem solvings of natural disasters. But this is the time now to work together, and I hope this will be the result and recommendation from this year's conference here in Rome, to set up agenda to bring the people into collaboration in 3 levels. This is the last minutes I would like to say. Number one, to share ethical shared values among our different beliefs. We do believe that we share the same ethical values. And number two, I think for the higher learning institutions based on religious organization to work together to find ways to prevent such pandemic to happen again in the future. And the last one, of course, I think we work with our government to work together for so many humanitarian problems we are facing now in the world today. And by doing so, I do believe interfaith dialogue has now should come to dialogue of action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Shamsuddin, for these words that bring to our memory what we have lived during the COVID-19 pandemic, the recession that we have been living, also the change, the word of cooperation, the field of education, as you mentioned, that has changed with the online courses, and the whole transformation that the world went through with the multi-crisis, which brought obviously poverty, the discrimination, global warming are all related, and we see that finally all these bring us to this idea that you mentioned at the end, that it's a sharing responsibility as religious leaders, but also men and women from different fields, from different education, from different countries. But obviously, we are united now in order to save the world of tomorrow. Thank you so much. And now I would like to invite Monsignor, His Excellency Archbishop Monsignor Vincenzo Paglia to take the floor. Your Excellency, thank you very much.
I think that it is very appropriate to consider altogether the pandemic. This forum is very meaningful and very relevant because the pandemic is really the greatest disaster of our century. We started with the Twin Tower disaster, but there is no comparison. 2008, the financial crisis. I don't dare to compare them. Millions and millions of people died, human disasters. And that is why we have to learn from this event that is still with us. And it's not taken for granted that we learn. We all remember that incredible contradiction. We have put our feet on the moon. We have been there. We reached the moon. But in March 2020, we survived. But in order to survive, we had to keep a social distance. We have been wearing this for 2 years. The mask was used 400 years ago. So we have to learn the lesson. And this is very important because it may happen, as it sometimes happened, that when you give a green light, we all gather again. We run the risk that the pandemic is once again there because we are just thinking about ourselves and not about our neighbor. I think that we really have to learn this lesson. And I would like to suggest 2 lessons to learn. First, the pandemic gave us a very bitter lesson. We are all fragile. Everything is fragile. We discovered it. Just rapidly from China, we had the virus come to Cotogno. Nobody knew the village name Cotogno. And in a few days, we were all stuck. We are all fragile. We discovered incredible things. There is a technological advancement. But despite this, we discovered human fragility. Well, we are all in the same boat. We are all in the same boat. But perhaps we weren't all in the same storm, but in different boats. A lot of elderly people died. That's why rediscovering fragility is the first lesson that we have to learn. Everybody's fragility. And fragility in everything, even science is fragile. Not understanding this lesson means falling into Prometheus' trap. As an old Greek said, we think to be God, but we are not. This is the first lesson. Second lesson we learned is that we are all connected. No one can say, I am an island. There are no boundaries. There are no frontiers, no barriers, no distances. Actually, we were told so. I remember I was young in 1972. Do you remember when they told us that just the butterfly in Brazil could cause a cyclone in Texas? The beat of the wings of a butterfly could cause this hurricane. We are all interconnected. We forgot it. And this is what brought about the pandemic. The pandemic doesn't come from heaven, but it's just because we tried to mischievously abuse creation. That is why rediscovering interconnection is the second great lesson that we have to draw. We are all fragile. We are all interconnected. And this mainstream, the old saying that we hear so often, my freedom ends up where your freedom starts. This is the wrong way of putting things. because either freedom belongs to everyone or no one is free. This idea is a very individualistic approach, and that is why we have the pandemic hitting hard. That is why it's a lesson. That is also an individual lesson. And this is a third step that I suggest. De facto fragility and de facto interconnection must become a choice. We have to choose fragility as a value. We have to choose interconnection as a political decision, as an economic decision, as a cultural decision, and also as a spiritual decision. And religions can really help us a lot. We Christians know that fragility is not a disease. Fragility is not something to be cured. This is Prometheus. Fragility for us is the condition of human beings who need help. God himself chose fragility so that we learn the value when he made himself man, or when he crucified him, or when rightly poor are the main focus of our attention, because if fragility is acknowledged and accepted, becomes a form of solidarity. Fragility makes us more caring. We beg for love, and we fight against the individualism that brings about the so-called self-sufficiency, self-determination. These are terrible dimensions. Nobody can say himself or herself alone. It's a condition to choose as a value. And that is why I am myself, thanks to you. There is a close connection that is of crucial importance. The right to love, the right to be loved, and the duty to love. It's the prerequisite of our life, and this is a great lesson that we learn from the pandemic. That is why I strongly believe that fragility has to become a great value of solidarity, and interconnection has to become fraternity, but not a fraternity, how should I put it, an aseptic fraternity, because Cain and Abel were brothers, but it has to become a decision of caring for the others. We care for the others, one for the other, because we are all fragile. This is a new condition. There is also a political condition. Wars break up because we consider that we are the only one who are powerful, strong, and can subdue others. When after the Twin Tower, we thought that peace could be reached by invading Iraq, it was poor, it was just foolish. Interconnection is not chosen as a cure. Or when we want to win and defeat the virus, when the science at world level agreed upon a solution, they found the right way to defeat viruses, and it will take us a decade to finally defeat the virus. And the experience we have gone through at the community of Sant'Egidio was that this instinct for solidarity and love brought about a lot of fraternity during the pandemic. Those who took care of others, risking their life, believers and non-believers who developed solidarity and closeness, proximity with very many people around them who were sick. Well, this idea of taking care mutually of one another is a great lesson that we have to learn from this dramatic event, the pandemic, a lesson that is important to learn personally, individually, but also as a religion, as a new policy, life policy, and as organization of different nature and background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for this very wise outcome of your experience, of long experience in the field of the different dicasteries where you've been, and also from a pastoral point of view, but reminding us how fragile we are, and also how interconnected at the same time, and how much this brought us to think about the solidarity that is necessary, to show more fraternity, and that this finally is the outcome where it shows that more fraternity is needed in our world in order to face not only this pandemic, but also all the other calamities that we have to face. Let me also call now Lucas Pedro from Argentina, from the Movimento Missionario di Francesco. He is the coordinator, national coordinator of the movement, and he will bring us his experience from another part of the world. Thank you.
Hermanas,
sisters and brothers, good morning to you all. It's a great joy for me to be here again and to be with you despite these very difficult and complex times. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to the community of Sant'Egidio for this meeting of ours. This is a new call to reflect and to promote human fraternity. I'd also like to thank all of the panelists that have contributed to an exchange of important reflections enriching us all. The papers or the considerations that I will share with you are the outcome of a community discussion. And very humbly, I would like to share with you the view of Latin America and of the popular movements that I belong to. COVID-19 pandemic has shown what we had been denouncing, that is an extreme concentration of wealth, social polarization, misinformation, destruction of the environment, exclusion of the workers from the productive system, and an increase in economic and social disequalities. We should also certainly take in consideration the existence of many conflicts and wars in the war. It's important that we are here trying to understand how we can work and live together so to solve the many challenges that humankind has to face up to. The first contribution that I would like to give you in order to live together and in peace is about justice. And I'm not talking about justice that we may find in courts, but it's social justice that I like to discuss with you. First of all, it's fundamental in this sense to guarantee three holy rights: home, land, and work. We certainly have to talk about fundamental rights, such as having rights to good and healthy food and education as well. But we must work together to build public policies in favor of the poor and the most vulnerable. These policies should not be only welfare policies, but they should contribute to a better distribution of wealth, to the creation of jobs, and the reaching of universal basic income. Certainly, we should also be concerned with the community and family projects associated with work. These are just some ideas that I'd like to share with you. We have to focus on people and the environment that are by far more important than money and anything else. The solutions, before we discuss the solutions, I'd like to refer to a world phenomenon that worries us very much. That is the disaffection, the political disaffection that we feel, all of us. And here I'd like to quote our Holy Father: "I ask God to give us more politicians capable of sincere and effective dialogue aimed at healing the deepest roots and not simply the appearances of the evils in our world. Politics, though often denigrated, remains a lofty vocation, one of the highest forms of charity, inasmuch as it seeks the common good." Well, I believe that we are really growing very distant from this view of politics. So nowadays, more than ever, we need to use politics as a tool for transformation. It's impossible that we can live together and in peace if we leave politics in the hands of the powerful elites or fundamentalist groups. Plato himself in 360 before Christ told us that the price of this disaffection of politics is that in the end we will be ruled by the worst possible men and women. So it is important to clarify that to be involved in politics cannot be limited to going to the polls, but rather it means participate in discussing and listening to what really matters. So we must be brave, we must be determined, so to build the best possible politics. Secondly, in order for us to live together and in peace, we need to build the bridges of dialogue and meeting. It is true that technology has improved our communications all throughout history, but it's also true to say that in the past 20 years, the use of internet and mobiles have provoked very high-paced changes that sometimes are difficult to be really to be taken by all of us. So there is an overdose of information, social media and fake news, and a very complex algorithm that manipulate what we see, make it very confused, the actual construction of the so-called common sense. And some of us are, or all of us are exposed to this, and we sometimes perceive the others as enemies. That there is a polarization, and the social clash is functional to those that want people to stay confused and disorganized. So we need a new way to take care of our environment and to promote development. We are very concerned about the increase in hatred and in hatred speech, and we see the polarization and violence. We realize that sometimes fake news are stronger than science itself, and we are also very concerned about the coming to power of world leaders whose speeches have little in common with the promotion of the common good and human fraternity. And a world without agreements would not lead to either dialogue or reconciliation. Thirdly, Pope Francis told us that we can come out of the pandemic being better, but not certainly identical to what we were before the pandemic. And as a result, I would like to leave some concepts regarding war that is certainly today's very critical issue. And I would also like to share with you this Latin American approach or view of the war, how we see it from our own part of the world. In war, there are no good or bad people. They're all bad. Wars are triggered usually by rich countries, world powers that actually they actually engage in war, but from afar. On the contrary, they should be focusing on fighting poverty against hunger, poverty, and climate change. But this is not so. They engage in war so to actually get to the most powerful situation. No war can develop without the purchasing or sending of arms. And if we continue supporting the age-old practice of eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, then of course we will not be able to get to any positive solution. And I call you to condemn the purchasing and selling of weapons, and we together should demand the end of all wars. This call can resonate and should resonate across the world, and if it does, then it will be heard by our rulers. We firmly condemn the war and invasion of Ukraine, Palestine, or other countries in the world. As an Argentinian, I wish to peacefully claim for the sovereignty over the Malvinas Island. So we really should put an end to all of this. And as I said, as an Argentinian, I'd like to call you to ask you to support aspiration to regain our sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands. You know that in the islands there is a military basis of NATO, and this is certainly not right. It's an exploitation of our land, our resources. It is located, the islands are located hundreds of thousands of kilometers from Europe. So, dear brothers and sisters, I hope that these days of prayer will help us find unity in peace and fraternity. Another world is possible. We can live together, promoting social justice, a sincere dialogue. We should stay away from any polarization and ban weapons and work together with bread, peace, and home, land, and work for everyone. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas, for these encouraging words coming from South America, and you stressed very well that all these questions come from your experience as an Argentinian, also as someone who is inspired by Holy Father Franciscus, and I think also your words regarding social justice and the creation of jobs, the care about the food, that we see how the world is facing now a new reality with limitations, and also your reference to the politics and from ancient times, mentioning Plato as well, but also the need of building bridges. And I also thought that was very interesting what you mentioned about the social media and the fake news and how they impact our world and our society. So there is a new way, definitely, and I think we should think in this way that you mentioned, that we can avoid wars, we can avoid the selling of weapons, encouraging these wars, and also think that the peace will be achieved only if we change ourselves first in order to change the world in general. Now, dear brothers and sisters, we come to the second part where we will have three discussants. They will take the floor for 3 minutes each. And then, of course, if we have time, we can exchange and we can continue our dialogue. So I would like to ask, first of all, Swami Amarananda, if, okay, you're here. Thank you.
A person paints. I am thankful to Sant'Egidio for organizing this meeting, and also it reminds me of the great work done by Sant'Egidio around the world for this cause, to battle against this pandemic. It reminds me also of the great sacrifice and dedication done by the order of Ramakrishna, to which I belong, in India and in Bangladesh. Unfortunately, we do not have any representation in Pakistan, but that is another thing. And I remember also that around the world there have been many other efforts by many other organizations to address this thing. Now, when the pandemic began, it raised a theological problem, you see, which has been discussed here, whether it is the result of man's sins, errors, or it is a punishment from God. Now, from the Vedanta perspective to which I belong, because Vedanta is the best fruit of Hinduism. So, from the Vedanta perspective, I should say, citing the Bhagavad Gita, Nanto nachadi nachasam pratishtha. That means we do not know the beginning of the universe, we do not know its end, and we do not know how it is being sustained. So our ignorance is there, you see. So I shall not try to, say whether it is man's error or God's issue, but you see, man and God, they are related. And in Vedanta, they say that man is potentially divine. That means the essence of man, you see, if you take out his body and mind, his sense organs, his this psychic apparatus, then something remains that is divine. And this is divine in all persons, you see. So man is potentially divine, so there is a question of, you see, and it is this message is translated in the phenomenal world because this is a message which can be best understood in the highest level of meditation and your concentration, purity, etc. But in the phenomenal level we live, you see, this is translated as solidarity, as compassion, as tolerance, as acceptance, all these good qualities and virtues. So that is the thing, you see, and this, when this came first, this pandemic, there's a confusion in the society, there's panic, there's confusion among the medical profession. They said humbly that we are learning, we do not know this virus, and governments, they are also composed of human beings, they were bewildered how to tackle this. So it was, the whole humanity was affected everywhere. So this is a situation which has affected us all and has brought some amount of togetherness. And this is the great lesson, you see. The remedies, the social distance, mask, and hand washing, this we learned from the Spanish influenza, you see. This we have put into place after a century. I say the new thing is this vaccination. You see, this is the new thing. So other things we have learned, and humanity as a whole has shown tremendous resilience, because in 326 days from the emergence of the pandemic to the putting in place in market of the vaccine, it is 326 days, which breaks all records. This shows the human will, you see, resilience, you see. So we must be thankful to God that He gave us this, you see, in spite of these sorrows and sufferings, He gave us your lesson of solidarity through this pandemic. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Swami Amananda, for your contribution, your insight. And now to continue reflections, I will ask Kaur Kiran Deep from Italy.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank Sant'Egidio and all the members of this meeting for giving me the opportunity to share with you my reflections during this session. The pandemic actually has kept us apart, locking us down in our own homes. But although this may sound as a paradox, the pandemic has united us because it has made us understand that we cannot live in isolation. And this is true especially for those like me who are engaged in treatment. The COVID pandemic has shown us different dimensions in treatment to serve the patients and their families. I'd like to share with you one of the situations that I suffer the most. The very first days of the pandemic were something unimaginable. We thought we were facing something that we could not possibly cope with and that was taking down our illusion of safety. We were there and unable to save lives of the patients that we were taking care of. During the pandemic, we lost a large proportion of our grandparents and great-grandparents that had lived through war, through hunger, and in long-term people's home. I saw how important it was to provide care for selfish care of the elderly. Our sacred book tells us, which means peace can be reached through love and selfish care that must be fully free of charge. We should always accompany this with meditation because we know that our hands must work together because just like the wings of the bird, they are indispensable to go forward. During the pandemic, we realized that we needed one another. And after these many months of suffering, now we should benefit from this understanding to continue working forward according to what this assembly is promoting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask now Eleonora Mura from the Czech Republic. Is she here? Yes. She's not here, so we can now open the floor to your questions. If there are any questions where you can ask and so continue our discussion. There are microphones that they can bring to you. Yes, please. Say your name and where you come from.
Buongiorno.
Good day. I'm Dainab, and I am belong to the Sant'Egidio community. I'm a Muslim nurse, and I think that the pandemic was a really challenging mankind. We live our daily life without reflecting. The pandemic gave us time to reflect, and I hope that it will make us more believer. Being a believer is a gift, and I hope that this evil brought something good. And I have a question for you, religious people. Was it a sort of way ahead? You couldn't celebrate for such a long time the Mass. And also then for Muslim, it was difficult. It was difficult for all of us to be together. The fact that we were not together, did it help us to have a new perspective, a new way ahead about how to live together in a different way, as if we were one single person? Did it happen to you? This was my question.
If you have any questions, you don't have to make more. I mean, if you have any questions that can be addressed to the panelists, or that we can have an exchange, please.
Buongiorno.
Good morning, I'm Vincenzo. I live in Rome, but I believe that I am a citizen of the world. I have two questions for you, and I address all of the panelists. We said that science gave us an answer on how to save a man's body. But if we only focus on this aspect, we may risk to set aside what we define as spiritual salvation. Right now, we see no happiness. We have digital literacy, but we do not know how much illiterate people, also culturally illiterate, exist in the world. So because we know that when there is ignorance, the seed of war actually grows. Now, speaking from a religious point of view, I believe that this is the so-called virus of the third millennium. This is the true pandemic. So how do you face pandemic from a religious point of view? Are you joining forces? Are you exchanging views? Should you follow the example of science that has found an immediate answer to this pandemic? Because we are faced with a spiritual crisis of modern man, and we see that there is a polarization. On the one hand, globalization and internet, and on the other, a lack of spirituality. And going back to the idea of science and technocracy, the various countries that are leading the way maybe will lead to the elimination of the fourth circle, that is our social community where all of us live. Thank you.
So I am from Poland, and I am okay.
The question is for everyone, because there is no spiritual health without a physical health for men and women. It's us. We are not split into two. We cannot be mind and flesh. We have both, a spirit and a body. And I would like to say something. I remember the Tenagoras, the great patriarch. At the end of the 60s, the patriarch said, I fear globalization without Christians being united. And we could add, I fear globalization without an agreement amongst religions. And this is true. This is a task for all believers. All believers have this task, not only those who are in charge, the clergy, and all believers. And these events of prayer for peace are responding to this question. And in fact, every year we convene, we meet together, men and women of different faith and religions, to do what? To make the human family a plural but single family. And your question, of course, is why we're here, and we want to go on. So we hope to reconvene also next year and spend time together and pray together and discuss together.
Okay. So I am from Poland, and I am a scientist. And in at least in Poland, but I guess that this is a general problem. We have the problem with Catholic fundamentalism or religious fundamentalism, but in Poland, of course, is Catholic fundamentalism, which is anti-scientific and anti-vaccine. This is both connected somehow. That there are priests which are claiming that one cannot be infected in the church in principle because Jesus is not spreading the virus. So my question is how to deal with this issue of fundamentalism, which is anti-vaccine and anti-scientific.
Question is not only for Poland, fundamentalists. We are all affected.
Prendo la parola come
As president of the Pontifical Academy for Life, I would like to take the floor, which is a Vatican organization. We felt the responsibility as Pontifical Academy to publish some documents. Of course, this was promoted by Pope Francis, and we were publishing some statements and papers considering this topic scientifically, the fact that the virus doesn't spread in the church because Jesus is helping us. God has so many other things to do. We have to wear the masks. It's up to us. So science is at the service of health. And we publish documents. It's not Catholic or non-Catholic. The Pope Francis spoke about solidarity. We wear masks not to save ourselves, but also to save others, to help others. This is the very dimension of solidarity. And I see you nodding, so I think you all agree. And I have to say that in the Basilica of Santa Maria in Trastevere, we never closed the church, but we always complied with the rules imposing social distancing. I think that social distancing is very important. We have to comply with the rules, and we never close the churches because we need God's help, but we need to be compliant. But the patriarch may answer the question better than myself.
I would like to connect some questions together. Firstly, you can be calm. Extremists and fundamentalists are in every religion, not just in the Catholic extremists. And people that deny, the common sense and the understanding that they are risking themselves and risking their neighborhood are always all over. And responsible politicians and responsible religious leaders can lead their communities to understand, to be cautious from these people, and to take away as far as possible from people that are spreading fake news and are, as I said in my address, they are very smart in their own eyes against all the information and against all the scientists, and therefore they have to be very cautious and take whatever vaccination is recommended by the Ministry of Health and so on. Now, Archbishop Paglia spoke about the fragility of person and mankind. It's true, but on the other hand, we are very strong. And the very fact that we are sitting here and talking about it, and we found solution, and the world united themselves together in order to find solution, it shows how strong we are. And you, as Catholic leader, and in every religion, I think, we found solution. At the very beginning, it took about a week or so that we recommended the people not to come to the synagogue because we didn't know actually what's going on. It took us about a week or two, and then we took very cautious steps in order to avoid spreading of the disease, okay? And we find a very interesting solution. Instead of coming to the synagogue, in every house, you could find in the yard people that are getting downstairs, in the garden, in the yard, people that are getting together and praying together, not in the buildings that it was more problematic, but in the open air, and it make people very close to each other and helping each other and finding a solution for those who can't do it and need help, the elderly, the capability, people that are not capable, and therefore we could find a solution to all these people. And when we're talking about such a crisis to the world, if we unite ourselves and we combine all the great brains that we have in every place, then the world can survive and overcome all these problems.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to react?
Just a little bit. I would like to touch upon the issue of the pandemic in relation to theological perspective. Of course, there are many perspectives from various religions, but I do believe the so-called Abrahamic religion, the revealed religion, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam share the same, to my knowledge. In Islam, all misfortune in human life are God's decision. This is a very fundamental belief. There is a relation to God's decision, but in the same times, it's a result from human's action, human deed. Whether that misfortune, like the pandemic, is punishment or not necessary punishment. It could be at the lowest level, it's only reminder to human beings that the mischief in their life will affect him or herself, so that we must return to God. That's the message. I don't know in Christianity, Catholic, and other religions have the same or not. And then, I would like to respond to the question from Poland, because there is also a group in Indonesia who are rejecting the vaccine so that they don't travel, because the government necessitated for the traveler to have at least 3 times a vaccine. But they are not necessarily fundamentalists and unscientific. This group developed their own medicine from herbal, because they learned from the prophet saying, because it was happening in the past, the same phenomena, same symptom like the COVID. And then the prophet was suggesting by that time to consume the so-called in Arabic al-Qahtul Hindi, the Indian cactus, grows in Himalaya and also in eastern part of Saudi Arabia. So they developed their own medicine. So I think they are scientific from their own perspective. Not necessary, but I think during the time of the pandemic, we need to extend our understanding to those group, to other group, and this is the time to show our solidarity, especially in the post-pandemic time. Thank you.
I would like to add something. Not only some believers or some confessions are fundamentalist, but for what the disease is concerned. But there are also scientists who do not agree with vaccination schedules, etc. So the situation is very confused. Also, scientists do not agree. What is important when we have a disease like this is not to fear, not to be scared. Of course, to comply with all the measures imposed by the health authorities. But first and foremost, we should not fear, not be scared. In Germany, for instance, the faithful who were courageous and complied with all the protection measures thought that it was better to have this disease instead of others. Those who were fearful didn't go to church and now are gradually coming back. But those who never feared were never away. They came to church, of course, to comply with all protection measures. And I see that now, after the pandemic, if the pandemic is considered to be over, faithful coming more and more to church, perhaps more than than before. And this is a great source of joy. I think it's a general phenomenon because people go through disease, distress, and come closer to God because no one else is helping us. How can we ask for help? Who should we ask to? When something happens in our life, what do? We get closer to God. So this is a lesson we learned from the pandemic and from this COVID-19. Thank you. Well, I think that the pandemic is it's a sort of something bad. It has nothing to do with God, like His Excellency Monsignor Paglia says. It's the very nature of mankind that is fragile, and not only mankind but also creation is fragile, and we cannot say that God wanted to punish us. God is our Father, and this is not right. It's not true. So we have to work hand in hand to fight against the pandemic and also to fight against other pandemics. We should not wait for miracles coming from heaven. God, respect our freedom, respect nature. God is not causing pandemics to punish us.
Thank you, Eminence. So, any other question? Yes.
I'm from Cameroon, and I'm part of the community of Sant'Egidio. What I would like to say is, and I don't have a question, rather I'd like to bear witness to what I lived through the pandemic. Because at the very beginning of the pandemic, we were only concerned with China, and we saw that this virus very rapidly came to us, and we were not prepared. But the community of Sant'Egidio saved many lives. At the time I was working with the elderly, we had many in our institutes. Other elderly were at the hospitals. And I can tell you that this participation in the activities for the elderly gave me new life. I learned a lot. For me, the pandemic was like a third world war. When I saw Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square by himself, with the square totally deserted, was really breathtaking. But we continued to work, and we reached out to many people, also to the homeless. We tried to do our best. We never left the elderly alone. And we also distributed the Holy Communion to those who could not come to church. I believe we learned a great lesson from the pandemic. We must not forget what we've learned from the pandemic. As Professor Riccardi says, and as our Holy Father says, we must keep our memory, because it's our memory that gives us life back. It's a memory that we have and that accompanies us also into the future. And we had a lot of people that had no legal permit of residence, and they could not be vaccinated. But despite of it, we succeeded in vaccinating many migrant workers without documents, without permit, many homeless people that, for instance, were here, but they were not part of this region and could not go back to their home cities. Nevertheless, we succeeded in vaccinating them. So I hope that we will preserve this memory, and this memory will make us stronger, will make us feel even more brothers and sisters. The community has certainly grown bigger during the pandemic, and I thank you very much for your attention.
I'm Martina, and I'm studying in an institute in Rome. Do you think that there was a social disaggregation after the pandemic? Because this is what they told us. And what can the institution do to fight against this problem?
Merci.
Thank you. I'm Grégoire, and I take care of sick people in Africa. During the pandemic, we became more united. What do I mean? In our center, we have more than 300 sick people. And when we were struck by the pandemic, everybody was afraid, because you know that the sick people are staying in the same room. So we were afraid, and we were praying to have vaccines. And when the vaccines arrived, many feared to be vaccinated. And what did I do? I went as first to get the vaccine. So I got the shot, and I had nothing. So colleagues went as well and got vaccinated. And then we invited the authorities to help us to vaccinate all the sick people. This was an example, and everybody followed us. So people are scared, because sometimes we give them wrong information, fake news. We have to be very careful about what we say.
Je me permets de poser la question suivante, c'est que je me vois devant.
I'd like to pose a question. We're here with many different religious denominations. And I'd like to ask you whether the community of Sant'Egidio has actually seen a tangible proof of the different religions coming together? Were you able to open up to civil society, or maybe there is this affection for politics? Because sometimes continuing in being engaged in a dialogue between religious people, then you don't get to the civil society. I'd like to reply to what can we do, the young generation, what can the young generation do when faced with these many challenges? Pope Francis is quite clear. He says that we should not look life from a distance. We must be involved in everyday life, so we cannot be on a terrace looking down. So we have to live this extreme use of internet on the side, which means that we must come together, we must think, we must discuss, we must exchange opinions. Because sometimes we find that our ideas are complementary to one another. And then we may start an action. In theology, in Latin America, we have a method that we go by that is observing, deciding and acting. So I observe my community, my family, my community, and I understand what is happening. I somehow discuss what is happening with all of the members. And once we observe and discuss, then we can take action. So to actually trigger the change that is needed, so to improve, to solve, to work. And this has to be done by the community. We must do it together by observing, deciding, and acting, and obviously organizing ourselves. We must fight for our planet, and this is why it's very important, the title, A Cry for Peace. We must certainly let our voices heard. We cannot just whisper. We must make ourselves heard, and hopefully we will continue to be brave and courageous enough to do so. Thank you.
I would like to answer the question asked by Nohe. Oh, well, he deserves a name because the pandemic is a sort of universal
Sant'Egidio
deluge. And Noha, dear Noha, during the pandemic, we created a boat. We built a boat during the pandemic. We called the Ministry of Health, confronted with all the tragedy, especially for elderly people who were dying or they were left alone. And the Sant'Egidio community called the Ministry of Health to ask for help and to ask her to set up a commission to look at the loneliness of elderly people who are left in elderly home and organize a home service to help elderly people at home. We worked for 2 years, and finally 10 days ago, the Italian government approved a bill, passed a bill to reorganize elderly policies in Italy. This is just to underline how we were not just talking and talking. It was not lip of service. We had to convince the Ministry of Health and all the other ministries and the Prime Minister's office to rewrote the bill, but they had to pass it so that all elderly are treated at home so that no one is left alone or left behind. And this shows that global focus, global attention doesn't cause only blah, 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 but also decisions that are taken at political level with laws and economic impact. And this is a first priority. Italy, after Japan, Japan is ranking second after Japan in terms of the number of elderly people we have. That is why we have to revise policies for elderly people in Italy, and we hope that this will also be an example followed by other countries. We have to change our mindset. All people died because we left them alone. We marginalized them. They couldn't even be buried because they were already buried mentally. They were already buried in our heart. That's why I answer this question. I had a first-hand experience, and I have to tell you that this is an extraordinary fact, an extraordinary deed. And we say that sometimes things are impossible for governments, but if the community push and make pressure, even government can understand.
Je pense que ce que le Père vient de dire est très important pour la paix, pour...
What Archbishop Paglia is very important if you want to live in peace and in harmony. There is a religious persecution due to the wrong interpretation of sacred texts. And as a result, we must understand the context of these texts and do away with what is left as hatred among religions. The world has changed. We must find a new vocabulary to be talking to the young people. We have to teach them to respect everyone, not simply the freedom of religion, but also the freedom of teaching. So far, freedom of thought has not been fully respected. And as a result, it's wrong, the idea that you must become a Muslim or a Christian. This is a sectarian frame of mind, which is really dangerous. It poses a new danger for international peace. Why is it that we're talking about fundamentalism nowadays, or why are we talking about the holy war or jihad? I think we have to put an end to this vocabulary. This is a very, very negative vocabulary. Thank you. Do we have other questions? Thank you for your interventions. Am I asking the audience if there are other questions?
So I think that we can conclude this morning session of ours regarding the lessons learned from the pandemic. We have heard different contributions, and that they are from multi-religious, also from different parts of the world, and which shows that we are, as it was mentioned, on the same boat. So we are, all of us, regardless of our origin and also of our religious affiliation, we are definitely on the same line, that we have learned a lot, and that definitely the pandemic is not quite over. We have heard of cases still, but definitely we are not in the beginning of 2020. We have learned a lot. We have applied a lot in our everyday life. And finally, it is in our hands and to make the world better. It is in our hands to face the crisis that comes, either it is political, social, or economic. And we are all facing this challenge, which is a challenge for everyone, from the most important from religious, but also religious leaders, but also lay people. And I think it is needed to, first of all, to thank all the panelists who have participated at this session, to thank Sant'Egidio for including us all on this panel, but also engaging more. And we make a pledge, if I can make, that we are all engaged and we are all interconnected, because we are all living on the same planet that we have to preserve and we have to care about, and to care about and to leave it for the next generations on. Thank you very much, and have a nice continuation.